weekly you demon. A Catholic guy's perspective on everything that matters. Culture, society, drinking, philosophy, religion, even politics. Enjoy.
Wow, I like that music. It's Blue Wave Theory, surf rock, or what I call neo surf rock, because nothing says Michigan in October like California surf music. We have a great episode ahead of us today. We have an extended discussion about the fall of the Roman Empire. We're going to be talking about Zen, getting drunk in communist countries, and other great topics. Hope you enjoy the show. Alright, let's talk Zen. We're going to start with a little example. Let's say you just worked in a soup kitchen for 4 hours, volunteering your time to help the poor. What should be your mindset as you walk out? A, I'm a hell of a lot better than Chesky, who's never stepped foot in a soup kitchen. B, everyone's going to think I'm a righteous dude. C, boy, that humbling experience just made me humble. D, man, I bet I just progressed 4 miles on the spiritual path. Or E, none of the above. Now, we all know it's E. That's obvious. But why? And that's kind of what Zen is trying to get at. Have you ever wondered, about trying to progress on the spiritual path? Spirituality, purity, selflessness, all of it is I want to be selfless. I want to be pure. I want to be spiritual. I want to be still. It's all kind of selfish in and of itself. And Zen is trying to smash through that. Keep in mind, last week we talked about Zen's effort to smash through the subject-object illusion. And again, as Catholics, we don't think it's an illusion. But Zen does have something valuable to say here. They try to smash through the subject-object illusion. And what Zen understands is ego is the biggest, baddest gorilla in the zoo of subject-object. Just like Christianity and the Catholic spiritual tradition understands that ego is the biggest problem to your pursuit of God, Zen understands that ego is the biggest hindrance in your pursuit of smashing through the subject-object. I think it's fitting to puzzle over something that St. Thomas Aquinas observed, which is basically no one can be so selfless as not to desire his or her own happiness. Basically it's impossible to not desire happiness. It's impossible not to desire the good. Even devil worshippers, they're seeking the good because they think there's something good in the devil, which points out why satanic worship is just idiocy on steroids, because Satan is our embodiment of evil, which is a lack of good, and therefore you can't pursue it unless you think it's good, and if you think it's good, it's no longer the devil. But no matter, that shouldn't detain us here. But Zen, though, tries to get past this, and it basically asks, is there a selflessness that cannot be desired? And again, I'm not going to try to answer that for you. Just something worth puzzling over. But Zen says yes, there is a selflessness that cannot be desired. And that is, as we pointed out in the last episode, it's just looking. You're not trying to purify yourself. You're just looking out and enjoying the world, looking out with a pure vision without thinking about you having the pure vision. So you're in that soup kitchen, just working, serving the poor without thinking about serving or the poor, or most importantly, yourself serving the poor. And even worse, you're not thinking about people thinking you're so cool for helping the poor. Again, that's absolutely positively crucial to the Christian, attitude as well, but especially in Zen, they want to smash through all such things that they consider illusion. And again, their goal is, through meditation or maybe sudden enlightenment, whatever it is all of a sudden just to eliminate that whole subject object, especially the subject, the ego, and just be. We're at the Middle Ages portion of the podcast, or I might say the pre-Middle Ages, because we're going to talk in this episode about the fall of Rome. And this might take up a couple episodes. I'm still trying to work it out. This is a topic that has long fascinated me. And I'll explain why in a minute. But it's long fascinated historians, scholars, just in general. There are over 200 theories about why Rome fell. It's been an obsession for years. In the words of scholar Glenn Bowersock, from the 18th century onward, we have been obsessed with the fall. It has been valued as an archetype of every perceived decline, and hence as a symbol of our own fears. And I too have been fascinated by the fall, primarily due to one thing, Hilaire Belloc's Europe and the Faith. Hilaire Belloc was a contemporary of G.K. Chesterton. He was a household name, and he was a fervent Catholic in a time in England that didn't pay to be Catholic. Socially, academically, if you were a Catholic, you're pretty much looked down upon. So Belloc, he didn't get a lot of the best university appointments, things like that, so he had to make a living for his wife and large family by writing books. And he just, he knew that a lot of the prevalent histories were incorrect, especially pertaining to the era from like 450 to 1600. And so he set out, he started using his mastery of the languages, he set out to basically recreate history. And at the time, he was often just perceived as a crank. But he posited a theory about the fall of Rome in 476 that basically said it didn't fall in 476. And there was, again, he was kind of dismissed as a crank, as being ornery. Even the great Catholic convert historian Christopher Dawson dismissed him. I remember reading Europe and the Faith and reading some things Dawson wrote, who I think most people would consider Dawson the better historian. And Dawson clearly dismissed the Belloc's theory about Rome and said, no, it's just a catastrophe. He was polite about it. I remember reading his Dawson's disciple, John Malloy. I remember reading some criticisms of him about Belloc and thinking, man, Malloy's kind of a dick. He wasn't cool about it at all. Well, what we've found out in the past 20, 30, 50 years is that Belloc was right. And again, that's an overstatement. I'll back it off in a minute. But no one ascribes to the catastrophic view of 476 anymore. No historian views that as the fall. Again, I'll finesse this in a moment. Archeology in the past 20, 30, 50 years has borne out what Belloc said, which is basically, okay, 476 occurred, and Rome is now ruled strictly from Constantinople, but everything continued the same. Again, as I pointed out last week, if you're a citizen in France, you consider yourself a citizen of the Roman Empire. You weren't a citizen of France, you're just a resident of France, citizen of the Roman Empire. The coins continued the same, language largely continued the same, trade continued, same household manners, life in the towns, it all continued pretty much the same for a long, long time. This has been such a stark, and one reason I find it fascinating because it's been such a big change just recently. We're talking about stuff from the 5th century. Theories have been held for a couple hundred years about the fall of the Roman Empire in 476, and in my lifetime, they're reversing it and saying, no, this Catholic crank Hilaire Belloc was right. So here's what's happening now in the academic world. Pretty much every historian is divided into one of two camps. You're a catastrophist, in which you view 476 as a huge break, a catastrophic fall, or you're continuous, like Hilaire Belloc, where you said, no, 476 was just a surface change, on the politics, everything else, pretty much everything, the other 95% of what matters continued unabated. Needless to say, I'm a continuous. Here's what I find very interesting. No one ascribes to like what I'd call the Dawson view, which is that basically Rome fell in 476 and everything. The Dark Ages started in 477. No one ascribes to that anymore. Archaeology has thoroughly overthrown that view. Now, are they close to catastrophist and continuous? That depends. Some historians are closer to catastrophe. Some are closer to the continuum or the continuous theory. But all of them are somewhere on that spectrum, which you couldn't have said that 100 years ago. Almost all of them would have been on the far right, so to speak, which is catastrophe. Now it's a blend, and you have a lot of people. There's a professor at UCLA I've been reading, and I can't draw his name up. I'll put it in the show notes. Who basically pushes this theory, and he's very intelligent. And there's lots of historians that push the continuous theory of Hilaire Belloc. So that's one reason I find this era fascinating. Another reason I find it fascinating is we don't know much. It's shrouded in mystery. And again, the mere fact that we rely on people on their hands and knees in France and England going through dirt to figure out what happened is just fascinating. And piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle. Part of piecing it together requires you to use your imagination. Again, not your imagination that you just make stuff up like a 4-year-old, but like your historical imagination. You think you put yourself in the era and think to yourself, what would I have done with this, and this were happening? Archaeology is telling us, trade was still happening. The senatorial class in Rome had fled to the countryside. What would you have done? Another reason I find this era fascinating is lots of legends. And this is the King Arthur era. In 410, the Roman troops left Britain, England, to come to the continent, to fight barbarian armies and to fight basically, wars of succession in the empire, leaving England unguarded. Well, then you had the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes invading, and the remaining people were kind of forced to flee or fight or make alliances, do whatever. And that's where your imagination comes in. What would I have done? And King Arthur was one of these resistance forces, pretty much left over, one of the old Britons, leftovers, and had to deal with the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, a Christian king. And again, this the legends, and it's not just King Arthur. There's other legends as to what exactly happened. And again, things were falling apart. I don't want to overstate and say, oh no, everything was hunky-dory. No, far from it. Things were falling apart, but things were also intact. But records aren't as good as you'd expect. So anyway, this is a fascinating era. We'll probably talk about it more, in future podcasts. But for the takeaway from today's podcast is you have continuous and you have catastrophists. Which one will you be? And I'll argue you should be a continuist, both as a Catholic and as just a clear-thinking individual. Let's talk about drinking. Last Friday I mentioned a study that showed that the longer people live under communism, the more they drink. I also pointed out that in Scotland, alcoholism is rampant. Here's 2 things you need to know about Scotland and communist countries. The state takes care of everything. Scotland is basically a small country population-wise, and it's just a welfare state. It depends on London to send them all sorts of welfare benefits. Communist countries obviously depend on the state for everything. And again, I realize they're former communist countries, but they're still heavily, people's lives are heavily subsidized by the state. The state still controls an awful lot of things. As I've pointed out previously, when the state controls things, when the state does things, when the state takes care of things, society doesn't. So when the state steps in, society falls apart. It's that simple. So what's that have to do with drinking? Well, maybe nothing. But here's my theory, that there's 2 types of drinking. There's escapist drinking, and there's embracing drinking. escapist drinking is where basically everything sucks, so I can get drunk and try to escape my problems. Embracive drinking is basically saying everything is good, everything is created by God, therefore I'm going to drink to try to shrink my ego to enjoy it more. That's the type of drinking, by the way, that I try to do, and the reason I think drinking is kind of a sacramental in some ways. I think it's safe to say that life in these former communist countries, based on everything we know, just sucks. And so people are drinking more and more to escape it. But why does it suck? It sucks because the state is taking care of things and society has fallen apart. 100 years, not quite 100, but, well, yeah, I guess in the USSR it has been. 100 years or close to 50 years under communist rule tears things apart. And so unless you're like Poland, and I'd love to see what the Poland data says, so to speak, in Poland. I look at Poland, especially like Krakow, as kind of a more joyous type country. It's gone back and re-embraced its Catholic roots. I'd be curious to know if they're doing a lot of problem drinking, because escapist drinking is almost always problem drinking. You don't see a joyful drunk doing the embracive type drinking. I'd love to see what the Poland's data says about Poland. But anyway, as society falls apart, people are just more miserable, and so they drink more. I think it's that simple. All right, let's have a short talk about small talk. This is a subject I'm kind of divided on. There's a writer I really admire named Richard Weaver. He wrote a great book, like a modern classic of conservative thought called Ideas Have Consequences. But he wrote a series of essays that I bought years ago, and I can't remember the title of it. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. But in one essay, he talks about the small arts. And these are just little things people do that really take an artistic flair, to do them well, whether it's hospitality or whatever. And one of the things he mentions is conversation. When you think about it, conversation is kind of an art. And art, and I could probably go on for 10 minutes, but art, when you look at it, is a very selfless type activity. You're kind of removing your ego and trying to put reality or the other onto the canvas. So, or whatever the art is, you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about something else. You're thinking about other, just in general. That's, I believe, if I recall correctly, Richard Weaver's primary point. So there is the art of conversation. Well, so small talk in some sense ought to be kind of like that. Well, it's the art of conversation, Shesky. You probably don't like small talk, which, by the way, is what I said in my blog piece. I don't like small talk. You don't like small talk because you're really selfish. And therefore you don't excel in the art of small talk because, you're just a creep. Okay, well, maybe. No doubt about it. A lot of times when small talk starts, I'd rather be doing something else, and therefore it's kind of selfish. But I guess I'd flip that around a little bit. The art of conversation is one thing. Wasting time with small talk is another. And where that line is crossed, I have no freaking idea. But here's the thing with small talk. There's basically two types. One, you're just killing time. So you're standing on the sideline at your kid's soccer game. You're bored. The dude next to you is bored. Everyone's bored. And so you just engage in small talk. That I just find it awkward. I mean, it's not bad. But I just find it awkward. But there's another type of small talk, which is you're taking up valuable time. So if you're at the office and you have things to do, well, you're duty bound to get those things done, not sit there and chat for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And I've noticed, both my own life and now that I'm getting older, it's kind of a young person thing. Young people seem to have a much greater desire for conversation, interaction, small talk. I'm not sure what it is. But what they need to keep in mind when you go and implement small talk with your coworker or whoever it is, you're imposing on their time. Basically, my standpoint is always saying, I don't care if you want to do small talk, just don't involve me. But your activity necessarily pulls me in. And I find that a lot in my life. And I don't know if I'm somewhat of a loner, although I don't feel that I am. I actually really enjoy people. But a lot of times it's like, look, I don't care if you want to do that. If you want to do X, Y, or Z, go for it. But don't pull me in. And the small talk person, especially the people who just talk and talk and talk and talk, it's like they have some sort of innate need to talk, which is selfish. But then on top of that, they want to pull you in on it, which is like selfishness times 2. Yes. So my attitude, I don't want to be bothered with small talk, is selfish. That's fine. I'll deal with that. Maybe I'll go to my confessor, my spiritual advisor, and talk to him about that. But then the person who imposes small talk on you, they're like selfishness times 2, because not only are they then asserting themselves what they want, they're also then demanding that you compromise what you want to accommodate what they want. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but just in general, I just detest small talk. Small talk, by the way, is not drunk talk. Sitting in a bar chatting. When I go to a bar and I'm drinking, I want to talk. I want to hear what other people have to say. I want to hear jokes. I want to interact. That's like, that's the old time and a place for everything. And so small talk, I guess my definition of small talk is it's basically conversation when you should be doing something else, or when you could be doing something else. Killing time waiting to do something else. Whereas true conversation, like the type you have in a pub, that's totally different than small talk, and that I really like, and that is where I think you practice the art of conversation as contemplated by Richard Weaver. I conduct a theology on tap session once a month at a local bar. And usually I do like a 15 to 30 minute presentation on some topic, and then we just open it up for questions and or discussion. Sometimes discussion goes back and forth between participants. Sometimes I just kind of just keep talking and rambling on. It's an enjoyable evening. This last week, a lot of questions came up, and I was shocked, but someone asked me about Joseph Pieper, and his book Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Pieper was a neo-Thomist philosopher in Germany, mid-20th century. Quite the heavyweight. If you want, by the way, great introduction to Joseph Pieper, get his Anthology. Joseph Pieper put the Anthology together himself, of what kind of he thought you should know about his work, and put it all in one book. And then Hans Urs von Balthasar, possibly the greatest theologian of the 20th century, wrote the introduction. And it's issued by Ignatius Press. So you're dealing with some pretty heady stuff, and it's really a splendid book. My copy just has markings all over it. But anyway, Pieper's most famous work is probably Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And here, this is a great book. I've read it twice. I read it when I was in my 20s. I read it again when I was in my 40s. But the basic premise of Leisure, the Basis of Culture, is that the world has become one of total work. And that's like the big theme, quote, total work, unquote. Pieper's point, which is well taken, is that whether you live in a communist country like Eastern Germany or a capitalist country, everything's dedicated to work, efficiency, getting things done. He goes, the true sense of leisure is lost. He even points out that leisure itself is merely a handmaiden of work. So you talk about people that they want to rejuvenate. When they take off on vacation, they're recharging, is how they often put it. Well, that's kind of terrible when you think about it. It's like, so you're just recharging so you can go back to work. So your time off is serving your time in. And it's basically, Pieper says this is a horrible state of affairs. He also points out that a lot of people spend their leisure kind of working. So instead of lounging around, taking it easy, people spend their leisure just going hard at it. Whether it's sightseeing, vacationing, whatever, they're constantly on the move. So his whole perspective is that, leisure itself has been kind of destroyed. Leisure, he points out, is true leisure because it intends nothing. And that's what you have to keep in mind. If you're really engaged in leisure, you're not trying to get anything done, you don't intend anything, you're just doing it. It's not a bucket list crusade. It's not a drunken crusade. It's not a squeeze every moment out of life crusade. True leisure is good because it does nothing. It intends nothing. G.K. Chesterton wrote, on at least 2 occasions I know about, he wrote essays about the goodness of doing nothing. And his point, as I recall it, was basically when you shut down and you do nothing and you just sit still, that's when grace can enter into you. And so you need those down times, the doing nothing times to invite grace. If you're just using your downtime to rejuvenate yourself for the world of work, you're not opening yourself up for grace. And I think ultimately that's Pieper's point. But anyway, go, if you want a good book, I'll try to post it to my show notes. Grab Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Base of Culture. I'll also try to post, his anthology. And by the way, I'm going to warn you, Pieper is not one to be read lightly. He wrote a bunch of what I call, thick, thin books. They're very thin, 60, 80, 120 pages. But they're thick in the sense that you really have to think. Every sentence is packed with meaning. It's almost like reading poetry. With poetry, every word means something. With Pieper, there are no wasted sentences. Every sentence stands by itself, yet builds, or prepares for the next sentence. And again, it's a slog. It really is a slog reading a lot of Pieper. And again, that's why I'd recommend the Anthology, because there I think he kind of breaks things down and makes them much more digestible. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, go to The Weekly Demon. Go to the new feed. It is not TWE. Go to The Weekly Demon on iTunes. Leave a review, subscribe. Need all the support. Check out the new podcast site, udemonpodcast.com. I'll be listing the books that I mentioned during this podcast to that site in the show notes page. You'll also find links and information that should be of interest to you if you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for listening.